Hello everyone, my name is Serena Vlazaga and I'll be presenting our work when malware changed its mind, an empirical study of variable program behavior in the real world. This was done in collaboration with my co-authors Zion Zhu, Leila Bilge, Davide Balzarotti, and my advisor Tudor Dumitrash. It is well known that malware don't behave the same in all environments. In fact, our work has identified a few root causes of environment sensitivity, such as missing libraries, different language settings, etc. Guidelines have also been proposed to account for this sensitivity. As an example from our dataset, the remnant worm is sensitive to the operating system and the privileges it runs on. In line 22, it checks for vulnerable version of Windows 7 to trigger a local privilege escalation. Should the malware run in a sandbox, the analyst would observe hundreds of mutex creation as we did in our data. However, running this sample on a different Windows version or in admin privileges will not yield any of the extra mutex creation. While in general variability is expected and studied in a per case basis, still we need to know how large this variability is in the wild and what behavior varies and by how much. To detect malware, we need to know if we can find invariants across machines and across executions. We also need to know how this variability impacts existing work such as malware clustering or detection. Answering this question requires data from many machines in the wild because sandbox observations may not be able to capture all environments or all the user interactions in the wild. Therefore, in 2018, we collected 7.6 million execution traces from 5.4 million users across the globe. As with other user data, privacy is at utmost importance, so we don't collect any identifiable information. Additionally, we don't put the user at risk by having them run malware, but we passively record any suspicious execution as the last line of defense for catching malware samples. Therefore, our dataset reflects the attack surface in the real world and what a naive vendor has to deal with. Technically, our dataset looks like a big table with rows corresponding to one action such as file creation, mutex creation, registry modification, etc., and their respective parameters. Of course, in each row, we have metadata to identify the executable that caused the action, as well as other information to distinguish between execution traces. For example, one thing we did in our dataset was to split the data into tables that have executions for a specific SHA-256 hash. And then we simply queried VirusTotal for those hashes to see the detection 1 year later. Then with the VT reports, we used AV class to determine which one is POP, malware, and the ones with zero detection, we call them benign. To motivate the variability analysis across machines, we take a look back at the remnant sample. When the conditions are met, the execution will reach line 22 and trigger the exploit. However, if the conditions are not met, then the malware will not trigger this exploit, and in that machine will not observe the creation of hundreds of mutexes. Therefore, to calculate this variability across machines, we perform the following steps. First, we take the table of traces for each sample, then we remove executions that happen 1 week after the first execution, and this is done to remove the variability observable over time. And we also assume that the malware won't change that much within the first week of its appearance. Next, we split the data by machine ID to separate actions that appear in a machine. And then, since the malware may repeat the same action, we deduplicate the repetition. This is done because one machine, the program may execute once, and in another one, the user may re-execute the program. Next, we count the number of actions we see in a machine and the total. After we get the count of all machines, we measure the interquartile range of the count, and the machine variability is that value. In our case, the machine variability is the total number of actions for that specific sample. In the interest of time, we'll only report our variability analysis on the total number of actions in a trace. In the paper, we analyze other actions as well as the variability across time. With that said, we follow the same steps described earlier for all malware POP and benign samples, and then we plot the distribution of these IQRs in the box plot as shown in the figure. What we found out is that malware indeed have the highest variability across machines. And in fact, for 50% of the samples, the machine variability is 59 actions, meaning that there are at least 59 missing or additional actions across different machines. Another interesting observation is that benign programs seem to vary in behavior as well. While we cannot determine the root cause of this variability, it serves as a comparison for that of the malware. Since two distributions are vastly different, one may use the variability as an indicator of maliciousness. When we zoom on every action type, we found out that in malware, file creation has the highest IQR distribution, which means that the variability comes from missing or additional file creations. Then we did a similar study on parameters where we found out that the file name is the one that is the most variable. In fact, there is 25 missing or additional file names appearing across machines in malware samples. In summary, malware has the highest variability across machines, and the file creation makes up for most of the variability. File name is also the most variable parameter. And as I mentioned earlier, more results are in the paper. With all these machine variabilities, is all hope of detecting them lost? We turn our attention to finding invariants in malware traces. Our focus is on open source host-based detection system, namely Sigma and Cuckoo. As highlighted in the figure, they both use a combination of action type and regular expression for matching a parameter. For regular expression to match, all tokens inside of it should match. And by our definition, tokens are substrings split by the Windows delimiters, as shown in the green boxes. Our study of these tokens was motivated by the fact that 80% of the rules in Sigma had at least one such token. As a first study in the wild, we investigate the most conservative invariant, a bag of all the tokens, and there might be some additional patterns such as regular expression or through neural networks. But if the analyst can get a high coverage of all the tokens, that we know that they can always create an invariant using a bag of tokens. Our methodology is as follows. We first extract all the parameters from benign and malware samples, then we split them by Windows delimiters as shown in the red to study a part of the parameter. After splitting them into tokens, we remove from every single malware sample the tokens that appear in any of the benign samples and the tokens that appear only once. And this is done to make sure that the values are an indicator of malicious activity. We consider all the tokens left as the invariant, and we measure their individual coverage and the overall coverage. Coverage being the ratio of machines they appear on. And this is done to simulate what the rules in detection system would detect, such that if one rule doesn't match, another one may. So we want to be able to capture malicious execution in all machines. We assume the best case scenario when the analyst will be able to capture the same execution we see in our dataset through their sandboxes. The experiment simulates the visibility of an analyst having n machines and measuring whether the malicious execution will appear in the rest of the machines. Using executions from 3 different machines, the bag of tokens will be able to successfully capture all the malware samples in 85% of the machines they execute on. Then adding more machines only has diminishing returns. The results only hold for file name. However, in the paper, we have more extensive analysis for other parameter types too. Last, we investigate how our variability affects techniques for malware clustering and detection. In the interest of time, we only present results for clustering, and in the paper, we show the impact on access miner and anomaly detection tool. Clustering is done to find samples that belong to the same malware family, implying that all the executions from the same hash should fall in the same cluster. In our study, we implemented the proposed work by Bailey et al. Since they were using similar features to ours. Malware in our dataset are generic, and we don't have clear family labels as in the prior work, so we pick 4 executions per hash and measure how many will fall in the same cluster. The intuition being that executions from the same hash will fall on the same cluster. However, from our results, we found out that for 60% of the sample, this is the case. But for 33% of the rest of the malware samples, they fall into 2 or more clusters. While more advanced clustering methods may perform better, we find that an analyst needs to be cautious when using one executions per sample to cluster malware into families. To sum up, in our work, we conduct the first measurement of malware behavior at scale. Our study shows that monitoring behavior at scale on real hosts can bring unique insights for malware analysis and detection. It can also call into question conclusions from experiments done with single traces per hash. We systematically quantify the differences in variability between malware POP and benign, possibly suggesting new ways to detect malware based on variability itself. We then show the feasibility of finding invariance in behavior, and this is a radical shift from the way behavior analysis is done today, but it can be done ethically, and AV programs are already in a good position to do it. And thank you again. My name is Serena Vlasaga, and I'm open to questions.